In 2008, one of the most famous faces in American television was about to lose everything. The bank was foreclosing on his house. He was millions of dollars in debt. Tabloids were reporting he was broke and possibly homeless. This was not some forgotten child star or one-hit wonder. This was a man who had sat next to Johnny Carson for 30 years, Ed McMahon, the voice that said, "Here's Johnny," every single night for 3 decades. He had earned tens of millions of dollars over his career, and now in his 80s he could not pay his mortgage. The irony was almost too cruel. The man who once made a fortune was losing his own home to the bank. How does this happen? The answer is darker and more complicated than anyone expected. This is what really happened to Johnny Carson's co-host. A quick backstory. Ed McMahon was not just Johnny Carson's sidekick. He was a one-man entertainment empire. For 30 years, from 1962 to 1992, he sat at that desk on The Tonight Show, making millions just to laugh at Johnny's jokes. But he was smarter than that. He diversified, appearing in Star Search from 1983 to 1995, where he launched the careers of Beyoncé, Justin Timberlake, and Britney Spears. He also debuted in Publishers Clearinghouse commercials, where he showed up at doors with giant checks. He did corporate speaking gigs paying $50,000 per appearance, Budweiser commercials, Alpo commercials, movies, books, voiceover work, you name it. By the 1990s, Ed was making between $2 and $5 million per year from multiple revenue streams. Well into his mid-70s, the money kept rolling in from every direction. He seemed untouchable. But nobody stays untouchable forever. The lifestyle that destroyed him. Ed and his wife Pam lived in a Beverly Hills mansion, a multi-million-dollar property with a pool, guest house, and incredible view of Los Angeles. The kind of house that cost tens of thousands per month just to maintain. And that's where the fatal mistake happened. Ed refinanced that house multiple times during the real estate boom. He took out equity loans. He borrowed and reborrowed. By the mid-2000s, he was carrying a mortgage between $3 and $5 million. Some reports said nearly $5 million. The monthly payments alone were $20,000 to $30,000, plus 6-figure annual property taxes, plus maintenance, plus insurance, plus staff. Ed was making millions per year, so he carried that debt based on one assumption, that the work would keep coming forever, that Ed McMahon would always be bankable. For years that assumption held true. The money kept flowing. Ed and Pam lived accordingly. They maintained that expensive property. They had no concern about the future because the present was so comfortable. That is what happens when you are successful for decades. You start to believe it will never end. Ed borrowed against tomorrow to live better today, just like millions of other Americans were doing. The only difference was the number of zeros. But those zeros were about to become a problem he could not solve. The fall that destroyed everything. Then, in 2007, everything collapsed. Ed had a serious fall at his Beverly Hills home. He broke his neck in multiple vertebrae. At 78 years old, that kind of spinal injury is catastrophic. It left him with severely limited mobility for the rest of his life. Chronic, debilitating pain that medication could barely touch. He needed constant medical appointments and physical therapy. The medical bills started immediately, and they were staggering. Tens of thousands per month between doctors, therapists, medications, and equipment. Insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. Ed was paying out of pocket for experimental treatments and premium care. But the real disaster was not the medical costs themselves. The real disaster was what happened to his ability to work and earn the income that was paying for everything. Corporate appearances disappeared overnight. You can't do speaking engagements when you can barely stand without assistance. You cannot film commercials when you are in constant visible pain and wearing a neck brace. You cannot travel to conventions when your body is shattered. Companies were not calling anymore. They wanted the vibrant, charismatic Ed McMahon who could work a room, not a frail 78-year-old man who looked like he might collapse at any moment. The hosting gigs dried up completely. Star Search revival talks that had been happening quietly stopped cold. Corporate events stopped booking him. The promotional appearances ended. The voiceover work slowed to almost nothing. The work just stopped. Ed went from making $2 to $5 million per year to making almost nothing in active income virtually overnight. He still had residuals from decades of television work, but residuals are smaller and less predictable. They fluctuate based on syndication deals and broadcast schedules, and they were nowhere near enough to cover a monthly mortgage payment of $20,000 to $30,000 plus 6-figure annual property taxes plus all the medical expenses plus the basic costs of maintaining that enormous Beverly Hills property. The income stopped, but the bills kept coming every single month, demanding payment. Ed started burning through his savings, desperately trying to keep up. But when you are spending $40,000 or $50,000 per month minimum and earning almost nothing, your savings disappear terrifyingly fast. Within months, Ed was falling behind on payments, and the situation was about to get exponentially worse. The broken neck was not Ed's only problem. He was already drowning in other financial disasters that most people never knew about. There was the toxic mold case. Ed and Pam's previous home had serious mold contamination, making them both severely ill. Respiratory problems, chronic health issues, unexplained illnesses doctors could not diagnose at first. When they finally figured out it was mold, they had to abandon the house immediately. It was literally poisoning them. They sued the builders and previous owners. The lawsuit dragged on for years. Legal fees cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Medical bills from the mold-related illnesses kept mounting. They eventually won a settlement. But by the time the money came through, years later, the damage was already done. The settlement barely covered what they had already spent fighting the case. Then came the credit card lawsuits. American Express sued him. Other major credit card companies filed lawsuits. Unpaid balances racking up while his income disappeared and his expenses stayed astronomical. The amounts added up to hundreds of thousands in credit card debt. There were also legal disputes over business deals gone bad, failed ventures, partnerships that imploded, contracts that went sour. Each one created its own legal battle with its own fees. Any one of these problems alone would have been manageable. A toxic mold lawsuit, some credit card debt, a business dispute. But all of them hitting simultaneously while his income vanished created a catastrophic financial storm. Ed was hemorrhaging money from every direction. Legal fees from multiple lawsuits, medical bills from the mold and the broken neck, mortgage payments that never stopped, credit card debt growing with interest and penalties, property taxes due annually in 6 figures. Everything was due at the same time. He could not keep up. He was falling further behind every month. The hole kept getting deeper, and he could not work his way out because his body was broken. Then the economy collapsed and turned everything into a complete nightmare. Then came 2008, and everything went from private struggle to public spectacle. The financial crisis hit. The housing market collapsed nationwide. The economy tanked, credit froze. Property values in Beverly Hills plummeted overnight. Ed was already struggling desperately to make his mortgage payments. When the crisis hit, it made everything exponentially worse. Banks were panicking. Lenders were foreclosing on everyone. There was no flexibility and no negotiation, just cold hard payment demands. Missing payments on a $4 million mortgage in that environment quickly became a public foreclosure story. By late 2008, reports started surfacing. Ed McMahon was hundreds of thousands of dollars behind on his mortgage. Some reports said over $600,000 in back payments. His lender filed foreclosure proceedings. The story went national immediately. Ed McMahon, the face of Publishers Clearinghouse, the man who gave away millions on television, was about to lose his own home to foreclosure. The irony was too perfect for the media. Headlines screamed about his financial ruin. Tabloids ran stories claiming he was completely broke. Photos of Ed looking frail and defeated appeared everywhere. Reporters camped outside his Beverly Hills house. The man who had symbolized prosperity for 30 years was now the cautionary tale. But the worst part was still coming. Ed was about to do something that would cement his fall in the public mind forever. In June 2008, Ed and his wife Pam did something shocking. They went on Larry King Live. They sat down on national television and openly acknowledged their financial problems. Ed admitted they had made mistakes. He said they had borrowed too much against their home. He said he had assumed the work would keep coming, and it had not. He said they were fighting to keep the house, but did not know if they would succeed. He looked tired. He looked defeated. His voice cracked when he talked about possibly losing the home. It was devastating to watch. Viewers were not accustomed to seeing celebrities, especially someone like Ed, publicly admitting his financial trouble. The Yes Sir sidekick, who had projected confidence and success for 30 years, was now on television saying he might lose everything. He talked about the medical bills, the broken neck, the inability to work, the mounting debts. Pam sat next to him looking equally defeated. They were laying it all out for America to see. The interview aired, and the reaction was immediate. If Ed was going on Larry King to talk about foreclosure, the problems must be catastrophic. The simplified story took root immediately. Ed McMahon lost everything. Ed McMahon is destitute. Ed McMahon is homeless. None of those things were technically accurate, but perception became reality. The damage to his reputation was permanent. America had watched one of its most beloved entertainers confess to financial ruin on live television. But what most people did not know was that behind the scenes, Ed was fighting desperately to save what he had left. After the Larry King interview, the situation became even more dire. The foreclosure clock was ticking. The bank wanted its money. Ed and Pam had limited options, and time was running out. They tried everything. Ed reached out to old friends in the industry asking for loans. Some helped, some did not. He tried to get new work despite his physical limitations. Voiceover gigs, anything that did not require him to stand or travel. The offers were minimal. Nobody wanted to hire an 80-year-old man in visible decline. They tried to renegotiate with the bank. The lenders were not interested in restructuring. They wanted full payment. They tried to refinance. No bank would touch them. Ed's credit was destroyed. His income was gone. He was a terrible risk. They put the house on the market quietly, hoping to sell before foreclosure. But it was 2008. The housing market was in free fall. Beverly Hills mansions were not selling. Properties were sitting empty for months. Ed was asking nearly $5 million for a house he owed $4 million on. There were no buyers. The situation was getting worse by the day. Late fees piled on top of missed payments. Penalties accumulated. The bank filed legal paperwork moving the foreclosure forward. Ed's lawyers fought to delay the process. They filed motions. They requested extensions. They bought time, but they could not stop what was coming. Ed watched his life's work slipping away, and there was nothing he could do about it. His body was too broken to work. His debts were too large to pay. The economy was too damaged to recover. And the clock kept ticking toward the day he would lose everything. Then something unexpected happened. Here is what the sensational headlines missed. Ed never actually ended up on the street. He never became homeless. He remained in that Beverly Hills home while negotiations happened behind closed doors. Yes, he was facing foreclosure. Yes, he was in serious financial trouble. But he was not living under a bridge. He still had assets the tabloids never mentioned. Residual rights from 30 years of television work generating passive income. Royalties from Star Search that still paid out quarterly checks. Payments from old commercial contracts are still active and enforceable. He had settled the toxic mold lawsuit back in 2002 for over $7 million. Not all of that money was gone, despite what people assumed. He had ongoing small revenue streams most people never knew existed. Publishing royalties from books he had written decades ago. Voiceover residuals from commercials still airing. Appearance fees from old work being rebroadcast. None of that was enough to save the Beverly Hills house. The mortgage was too big. The debt was too deep. But it meant he was not completely destitute living on the streets. Behind the scenes, there were intensive negotiations. Potential buyers interested in the property despite the market crash. Lenders willing to work out deals to avoid a messy public foreclosure. Real estate agents working overtime to find solutions that would let Ed and Pam walk away with some dignity. In early 2009, those efforts finally paid off. A buyer emerged. The exact details were kept private, but reports suggested the sale price was around $4.6 million, just enough to cover what Ed owed the bank. Donald Trump publicly offered to help Ed during this time, claiming he would buy the house himself if needed. Other wealthy individuals reached out privately with similar offers. The foreclosure was officially avoided just weeks before it would have become final. Ed and Pam sold the house and walked away instead of being forcibly evicted by sheriff's deputies. They avoided the absolute worst-case scenario, but the escape came at a cost. They had lost their home. They had spent their savings. They had damaged Ed's reputation permanently, and Ed's health was getting worse by the day. The stress had taken a brutal toll on his already broken body. But by then, the damage to Ed's image was already permanent and irreversible. The myth had taken root in the public consciousness, and nothing could kill it. Ed McMahon lost everything and died broke on the streets. That is what people believed. That is what they still believe today. It does not matter that he sold the house instead of losing it to foreclosure. It does not matter that he had residual income still coming in. It does not matter that he died in a hospital surrounded by family instead of alone under a bridge. The simplified version was too perfect, too dramatic, too useful as a morality tale. The media had created a narrative, and that narrative became reality in the public mind. Ed McMahon became the cautionary tale about living beyond your means, about borrowing too much, about assuming the good times would last forever. Every article about celebrity financial disasters mentioned Ed. Every discussion about the dangers of debt used Ed as the example. His face became synonymous with financial ruin. The irony was brutal. Ed had spent 30 years as the face of winning. The Publishers Clearinghouse guy who showed up at your door to tell you that you had won millions. Now he was the face of losing. The guy who proved that even if you made millions, you could still end up with nothing. That transformation from winner to loser happened in the public eye over the course of just 2 years. From 2007, when he broke his neck, to 2009, when he died, Ed McMahon went from comfortable retired celebrity to broke cautionary tale, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The narrative was set, the story was written, and Ed was too sick and too tired to fight it anymore. Ed McMahon died on June 23, 2009. He was 86 years old, just months after selling the house, just months after avoiding foreclosure. He died in a hospital in Los Angeles after a series of cascading health problems, including pneumonia and bone cancer. The broken neck from 2007 had never fully healed. His body had taken too much damage. He did not die homeless, despite what millions of people believed at the time and still believe today. He did not die destitute, sleeping on a park bench. He died in a hospital bed. His wife Pam was at his bedside holding his hand. His children were there. He was not alone in some forgotten corner. But the narrative that had formed over the previous year stuck like cement. Ed McMahon lost everything and died broke. The story was too dramatic, too perfect as a cautionary tale about fame and fortune disappearing overnight. The truth was more nuanced. He had faced financial ruin. He had struggled publicly. He had sold his home to avoid foreclosure. But he had not ended up on the streets. He had died with some dignity intact, just not the financial security he had spent a lifetime building. The tragedy of Ed McMahon is not that he died in the gutter. He did not. The tragedy is that someone who symbolized prosperity and success for millions of Americans ended his life wrestling with the exact same problems that destroyed millions of far less famous people at the exact same time. Medical bills that insurance would not fully cover, overborrowing during the boom years that became unsustainable during the crash, an economic collapse that destroyed property values overnight, a broken body that could no longer earn money. These were not unique celebrity problems. These were the problems facing millions of ordinary Americans in 2008 and 2009. The difference was that when it happened to Ed McMahon, the whole country got to watch. His financial collapse played out on television, in tabloids, on entertainment news shows. Every missed mortgage payment became a headline. Every legal filing became a story. Every photo of him looking frail became evidence of his downfall. He lost his privacy the same moment he lost his financial security. That public humiliation while he was struggling to survive is the real tragedy. Ed McMahon spent 30 years making America laugh. He sat next to the biggest star in television. He handed out giant checks and told people they had won. And when he needed help, when his body broke and his income vanished and his debts overwhelmed him, America watched him fall. We turned his suffering into entertainment. We made his failure a cautionary tale. We used him as an example of what happens when you live beyond your means. As if medical disasters and economic collapses and broken bodies are moral failings instead of tragedies that can happen to anyone. What do you think? If Ed McMahon, who worked 30 years on the biggest show on television, could still end up facing foreclosure, what does that say about financial security? Comment your take in the comment section below alongside everyone else. And if you want additional stories about television legends, you should subscribe to the channel to help support us in making these stories. Plus, YouTube thinks you'll like the video on screen, so click it to continue watching content like this.